Okay, today with me, as I said, an amazing guest, Jesse Ewell, and he is the creator of the habit-based lifestyle, which for me is one of probably right off the bat a favorite calling for me, favorite brand. I'm all about habits, man. I think habits is what drive you to be who you are, and I am really excited to have you here today. I can't wait to see what you're going to bring. And I know this is going to be an incredibly powerful next 30, 45 minutes of time that we have here together. So without further ado, Jesse, why don't you give me or give our listeners kind of that 30,000 foot view? What are you about? What is this part of your life about in terms of giving back to the world?
Yeah, that's amazing. First, I want to thank you for just giving me the opportunity to be on here today and just to be able to speak to your audience. So just a little bit about me. I grew up in a small town called Spokane, Washington. If you guys don't know what that is, it's if you ever heard of the school Gonzaga, that's where that came from. So if you're a basketball fan, you may have heard it from there. Maybe you're a wrestler. Back in the 80s, they created a movie called Vision Quest. It's an all-time classic, but
it is.
Anyways, it's in the Northwest, part of Washington. And I was big into sports. Working out was something that really kind of like, I'll say, kept me from, getting in too much trouble. Although I did get in my fair share of trouble, but working out was something that I was super passionate about, young age. And I was big into sports, right? I started boxing at 10 years old. I used to actually travel to Canada quite a bit when I was a kid to box, believe it or not. And so also played football, played, some college football. And one of the things that I love the part of the game where you were always prepping for the game. And so because it always came back to habits, right? And it was like, hey, most of the guys that I played on teams with, they were guys that were, they'd work out a couple times a week, but I really at a young age took it upon myself to try to outwork or out train everybody else. And as I, continued on, I got into the fitness industry in 2002, 2003, and, really found myself working in like the bigger box gyms at the time. My first job was at a powerhouse gym, and the guy that actually owned it used to be part of the Christian strength team, where they'd go around and do all these feats where they'd, tear a phone book in half, break bricks, all these like crazy things. But I was around that. I was around that environment. I even did my first bodybuilding show at 17 years old. And I absolutely loved the gym so much to where my number one goal after football was to open my own gym someday. And, when I first had that goal, there was no training facilities back then. If you had them, they were more of the strength and conditioning facilities. Yeah. But I got into the box gym industry, which would be things like 24-hour LA Fitness, those things, and really learned how to, be a personal trainer, but really learned how the business side of it, right? Because I think a lot of times we can be passionate about what we were doing, like personal training, maybe even chiropractic. Or just being a health professional, we become really passionate about that, but we don't understand the business side of it. And that was where I really got to learn the business side of what I was doing. And about 5-6 years into being a trainer, I worked my way up to general manager. I got fired because we weren't hitting the numbers that we were wanting to hit, right? And so I had to step down. And I kind of started reevaluating like where I was at in my life. And one of the things that I came to was like, man, I think I want to open up my own personal training facility. And because I'd understood the business side, but here I had all this skill set as a trainer that for the last 2 years, I felt like I hadn't been using because I was the general manager, which was responsible for selling memberships and kind of like driving production. So I kind of found out our entire company was getting ready to sell. And I'm like, man, what a great time to open up a training studio. And so I ended up opening up a personal training studio in 2007 in a little 2,000 square foot space. And back then, if you guys know, back then, if you were in the training industry or gym industry, I had all fixed equipment in a 2,000 square foot space. So we had like literally no room to move around and work out. And so within about 2.5 years, I had built that up to the seams to where we literally had to warm people up in the parking lot because our gym was so packed. And so because of that, I ended up having to expand into a bigger location within about 2.5 years and moved into another location. It was 4,500 square feet, and just began to build a team and understand like what it took to really grow a business. And my goal, initially was like, man, I'm just going to open up a location. Me and one of my other guys who was a trainer, we're just going to kind of ride off into the sunset. And 2.5 years later, we were already expanding into like a double size location. Within 3 years of that, I ended up opening up another location, and then eventually just having those 2 locations. And we went from, I think our first month in business in that 2,000 square foot space, we did like $26,000 in revenue. By the time I left that location, we were doing almost $70,000 a month in revenue, which is pretty much unheard of in a 2,000 square foot space. And then by the time 2015 kind of rolled around, I just kind of found myself in a dark place with my wife. And one of the things that happened was I was 100% focused on the business and not on my marriage and not on, helping my wife raise our kids. And so, my wife, basically called me one day at her counselor's office and was like, hey, I need you to come here and we need to have a conversation. And I go to the counselor's office, like, not really thinking anything of it. And all of a sudden my wife tells me that she feels like a single parent, that basically I wasn't showing up as a husband, father, and leader. I was showing up in my business, but I wasn't showing up at home. And she began to kind of let me know, all the ways I wasn't showing up. And so, in that moment, I realized I needed to make some changes, and I ended up actually kind of like seeking out a mentor and coach, and, kind of had my own breakthrough. I went through a program called Wake Up Warrior in 2015. And that really kind of helped, set the foundation of the things that began to change in my life. And so, just a couple of things I thought of is like, hey, I thought like a father, what I was doing was the right thing, right? I thought bringing in the money, I thought having, money in my bank account was enough that would show my wife love, and show my kids love. And yet that wasn't really what my wife was looking for. I mean, she liked the fact that, I was making money and we were making money in our business, but I wasn't really, paying attention to her and my kids. And so over the next, from 2015 for the next 6 to 8 months, I began to, get better skills, have a better mindset, and have better habits as just a father, a husband, a leader. And so I started to kind of like go down my own journey of kind of like understanding like what habits it took to actually be a, multi-dimensional businessman rather than like a one-dimensional businessman, which, a one-dimensional businessman is kind of the guy or person who stays in their business and kind of just focuses on that. And, when they come home, they're kind of like not present and just not doing the things to help, their wife out or help their spouse out. And so that was kind of my initial introduction into, living a habit-based lifestyle. And so yeah, go ahead.
What would be an example of like the breakthrough habit, the kind of the linchpin that you put into your life first, that kind of was the waterfall effect, the watershed moment for you?
Well, let me say this, like as an athlete, right? I understood like the habits it took to become a better athlete, right? And I understood the mindset that it took to do that. And I also understood what that looked like in business. Okay. But where I was missing was, what did that look like to be a husband? What did that look like to be a father? And so, kind of like my awakening moment was like, here I am in this program with all these guys, and I'm there saying, hey, I want to take my business to the next level. And I remember, my coach simply saying like, hey man, if you treated your business like you treated your wife, how successful would you be? And in that moment, I was kind of like, man, I think I'd be bankrupt, or I'd maybe just be getting by. And he's like, well, is that the way you want your marriage to be? And I was like, you know what? It's not. But in that moment, I started to recognize, like, hey, what if I treated my marriage as my number one business, not my kind of like secondary business or like third or fourth business? And so I started to look at, well, what are the habits that I have in my marriage? And most of my habits were not very good. And so that was kind of the first thing that I began to change. I began to take my wife on date night. I began to, leave my wife messages every single day. In fact, for the first probably 300 days, I sent her a video every day, just simply talking about, hey, thank you for the mom that you are. Thank you for, waking up with our kids. Thank you for taking them to school. Thank you for just, being able to kind of be a mom at home and take care of our family. And as I began to do that, my wife began to change. And so, what I kind of did is, for a while, I looked at my wife as the problem. Like, oh, I can't believe, she would complain. Here I am making all this money. And so I kind of started making my wife the problem. The problem with that is, if my wife was the problem, then she was the solution. And that really left me in a powerless place. And so once I started taking responsibility and ownership for, how I was showing up, then things began to change. And I think a lot of times we can look at our spouse, we can look at our employees, we can look at, even our customers as the problem. But they're also the solution in that. And that for us is a really hard place to grow or get out of, because that requires them to change, not us to change. And so as I began to change, my wife began to change, our marriage began to change. I started showing up, more as like a present father, taking my kids on date nights, even, coaching them in sports, stuff like that. And our lives really began to change. And because I kind of experienced all these changes and transformation, my life within about 8 months of going through Wake Up Warrior was completely different. And so, at the time I was a personal trainer. We had 2 locations. I was like, you know what? I think I want to bring this into my gyms and, really leverage this program to help other men in my gyms. And so I began doing that, and just began to see the changes that other guys were making, from the things that I had changed about myself. And then in 2016, I got the opportunity to go actually volunteer and work for Wake Up Warrior for, just on a volunteer basis, where I could go to Southern California and help work with guys. Began to do that. And then I got offered, within about 6 months of that, I got offered a full-time position to run Warrior Week. And as I began to do that, I really started to see the impact that I was making, not only in the guy's life, but also the family, where, wives would message me and just say, hey, thank you so much for the impact you've made on my husband, the impact that you're making on our family. And it just became, it really became more fulfilling than just teaching people how to lose weight and, exercise better. And so I kind of made that transition into wanting to do that full time. Right. And so 2017, I kind of got to this place where I was like, okay, like either I keep, doing my fitness business. At the time I had 25 employees. We were doing over $2 million a year in revenue, or I could go full time into coaching and just stay with Wake Up Warrior. And so I really weighed those 2 decisions. And at the end of 2017, I made a commitment that I was going to sell my training facilities and go full time into coaching. And so within about 6 months, we basically closed on the sale of our gyms. And we ended up moving to Southern California and working full time with Wake Up Warrior, as I kind of had a full time position helping other, potential coaches and trainers. And we have a couple mutual people, but basically teaching them how to get certified in the Warrior's Way, which is what that was called. And my whole job was to help guys get certified in that. And so we moved from Washington State to Southern California. Within about 4 months of moving here, my contract ran out, and I was kind of in this place of, hey, either you can continue to work for me in Wake Up Warrior, but we're going to, change your position to this, or you can do your own coaching. And after being an entrepreneur for 12 or 13 years, I don't know if you've ever done that, but like going to work for someone else, I didn't like it. And so I made the decision at that point to launch Habit-Based Lifestyle, which is basically the business like that I have now. And, how did I come up with the name? Is I really looked back at everything in my life from, that point to before. And I was like, man, what was the thing that really helped me get to where I wanted to be in my life? And I always traced it back to like habits, and even the time I had to change everything I was doing in 2015 was like habits were the thing that really helped me get to where I wanted to be. And so, that's kind of how I created Habit-Based Lifestyle. And I really kind of took accumulation of everything that I'd done in sports and just being around the fitness industry for so long, and then getting into coaching. And, I think the biggest thing I looked at is like, man, I want to make a big transformation on someone's life. I don't want to just, count reps. I don't want to just, talk to people about nutrition. Like I really want to get to like the heart of what's going on in their life. And so, Habit-Based Lifestyle was born, and, we launched our podcast. I wrote a book called Man in the Mirror, and that's kind of how it all started. And so for the last, for the last 4.5 years, I've coached men only. I've coached men and women. We coached marriages for a while. And then the last 2.5, 3 years, we've really kind of dialed into working with health professionals and coaches and really helping them grow in their business and life. So
now, like obviously you've been through the struggle portion of your life. You've been through, you've obviously done the struggle and emerge portion. Now you said you're focused primarily on healthcare and coaches, correct?
Yep. Yeah.
And so what would be that, like, if people were to implement one thing from this show that that one little like thing that could change their lives, what would be that one thing that you would say, listen, if you're going to do anything, do this one thing, and you're going to see in 60, 90, 120 days that your life is different if you were to implement this as a habit into your life?
Sure. To me, like the biggest thing is like, it's not about the habit as much as it is about what is the goal that you want in your life. And then what is the habit that actually helps you get to that goal? And so we call it a reverse engineer production. Mm-hmm. So if I want a better marriage, like I have to have specific habits that are going to help me have a better marriage. Okay. So like, I always think of it as 3 things. You need to have a better skill set. Okay. And I'll explain what that means. You need to have a better mindset. I'll explain what that means. And then you need to have better habits. Okay. So skill set is, what are my skills as a husband? Okay. And so I need to be a provider, for my wife. I need to be a good listener. I need to protect my home. And I also need to be available. And those skills, those required me to have skills, because like I only knew how to be a father from my father. Most of us only know how to be a father from what we were represented. And so sometimes we need to level up our skills. So I need to be around other fathers who have the skill set that I need. And that was one of the first things that I did, was like, hey, here's a group of guys that are teaching me how to level up and be a better husband. And so that was the first skill set that I kind of stepped into. Now, the next thing was like, I needed to shift my mindset, because here I was, being a big baby, being a victim, blaming my wife. Right. And so I had thoughts, I had beliefs, I had stories about my wife that, maybe she was a bitch, and just complaining that I was just making money and wasn't doing these other things. And so I had to change my story about my wife. Now, here's the crazy thing. Most of us, we can tell 4 stories. Okay. And I'll explain what that means. So number 1 story we usually tell is a victim story. Why is my wife doing this to me? Why is my husband doing this to me? Why is my spouse doing this to me? Now, just like I said, if my wife is the problem, she's the solution. If, you're the problem, Kelly, you're the solution, that doesn't require me to change. And so I started to learn how to walk through 4 different variations of stories. There's the me version, which is usually kind of a victim-based story. There's the other version, which could be like my wife's story, is like, maybe I'm the problem, not her. And I got to look at it from her point of view. And then there was the opposite version of, maybe instead of, my wife's, a bitch, to my wife isn't a bitch. She's just, these are things that she wants in her life. So those were the three variations of stories that I started to look at, right? Now, there was one last variation that I never really understood. And it was, well, what's the story that's going to get me what I want? And so that was a big shift for me was, a lot of times in our stories about other people or situations, we tell the story to be right, not necessarily to get us what we want. Right. And even if my story about my wife was true, was it getting me the results I wanted in my marriage? And quite frankly, it wasn't. And so I had to either change my story or I had to change my relationship, and not have a relationship with my wife. And that wasn't really an option. So I began to tell the story that got me what I want. And I began to make the changes to do that. And so as I did that, I could now step in to say, okay, if my goal is to be this type of husband, what are the habits that are going to help me get there? And so, one for me was, like I said, leaving my wife messages every single day where I, thanked her, appreciated her, honored her. The second thing was we started going on date nights every single week. That was like a non-negotiable. I set them up. I kind of did everything. And then the third thing was we started going on, vacation quarterly or, a couple night getaway every month. And so I started treating my wife like she wanted to be treated, and things began to change. So, those three things are what I look at now in anything. So if I want to change my business, I got to look at what skills do I need to level up in, whether it be, as a marketer, sales, leader, whatever that is. What's the mindset shift? What's the current story I'm telling myself? Is it getting me the results I want? If it's not, I need to change that. And then what are the habits that are going to help me get there? And so I always really think of this as like three things. Those three things are what need to change, right? And I need to get to the root of those if I want to have a better result in my life.
Right. No, I think that was like everybody in some way is trying to improve some facet of their life, whether it's their health, their relationships, their business, their mindset, whatever. And to be able to set that as kind of the parameter, the first thing they need to do is actually, kind of decide what it is they actually want and then reverse engineer it backwards, right, using those three key principles. I think is incredibly helpful for anyone that's trying to make a change in their life.
The thing nowadays is like, what do you see nowadays is like, hey, I'm going to go do 75 hard. And not that there's anything wrong with that program. Even the program I went through, they were like, hey, we do these core 4, we do these habits every single day. And those programs are great. They give you a really solid foundation, but like there's someone else's habits. There's someone else. Like 75 hard was created by a guy who was 150 pounds overweight.
Right.
Right. And so why do I need to work out twice a day? Okay. Or, here's this other guy that created core 4 and they were great. They gave me a solid foundation. 75 hard maybe gave you a solid foundation, but at some point you need to understand that if you have a specific goal, you need to reverse engineer your own habits to help you get there. Otherwise you're just going to keep recreating the same results over and over. And so, if there's one thing I can tell you is this: I'm not knocking you if you're doing one of those programs, but what I am saying is at some point you need to customize it and make it your own so that it's taking you to where you want to go. It's not borrowing habits from somewhere else, from someone else. Because at the end of the day, I'm not going to tell you what habits you should be doing or shouldn't be doing. I'm only going to ask you one question, like, hey, is this habit going to help you get the results you want in your life? If it's not, then you need to change it.
Love it. I love it. So just before we get you into the TCP time machine, which is puts you back in space here, quickly, is there anything that you're like super focused, passionate, excited about right now?
Yeah, let me just say this, man. Like, number one is I'm really passionate about restoring family right now. And so what that means is this: like, there's a restoration project, I believe, happening all over the world, happening, in every country, but like, we have to restore ourselves first before we can restore our family. And I think the biggest thing that we have to work on is obviously ourselves. That's where it all starts. Change starts, with us first, and then we can begin to transform others around us. And so, what am I passionate about? I'm passionate about helping, people transform in the health and wellness space, because I know that a lot of the people in the health and wellness space, like they're impacting more and more people than anywhere else. But I always think that the one place that we forget to impact is ourselves.
What could you just give me like just a little bit more what you meant by the world is going through a restoration project?
Yeah, think about all of everything is about splitting, the family up, right? And so we have all these things like, gender equality. We have all these things like, transgender, these different genders, right? And I believe it's all to pull apart, families, right? It's, if you see a lot of the news nowadays, or a lot of the things that we have going on, it's to pull apart families. And it's to kind of like confuse everyone of where they're at. And so what I believe is that if we can come back to, who we actually are, get our beliefs in order, get ourselves in order, so that we can actually restore, ourselves, restore our families, and, not have all these like chaos and crazy things going on around us, that we can begin to make, real changes, in our lives and in our country.
Love it. I love it. Okay. So we're going to put you in what we call the TCP time machine. That's where if you could go back to a younger version of yourself, knowing everything you know now, what would you say to that younger version of yourself? And let's go back to when you were kind of in a point, like say, right around that. Obviously, you were searching for something in that 2015 time frame when you went to the Warrior. What would you say to yourself if you went back to that guy as he was getting on the plane to go down to Southern California to go down and meet the guys from Warrior?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would have probably told myself is that, just to let go of the ego, and, just let go of trying to like prove yourself to other people. That would probably be the biggest thing, man, is like, I think as guys and as business owners, right? And for me, like I was a liar then, and what I was lying about was like, I said I was going for business when I knew that wasn't really what I was going for. I was just hiding behind that. And I think as entrepreneurs, the easiest place for us to hide is in our business.
Isn't that the truth? Isn't that okay? So 3 final questions for you, Jesse. Who would be the greatest person of influence in your life?
I would say, besides God, my dad, for sure. My dad taught me as much of what not to do as he did what to do. But also, he really, like, what I came to the conclusion of is like my dad did what he knew based off of his dad. His dad did what he knew based off of what his dad did. So like my dad never did any of that stuff on purpose. He did it off of the training that he had. And so once I kind of recognized that, I could begin to appreciate my dad even more than I did, growing up. And, my dad was kind of like my hero, but I felt like he let me down in a lot of ways. But when I came to that realization one day, it let go of every standard that I had for him. And then it also let go of all the guilt and shame that he had.
Oh, geez, we could spend another podcast just unwrapping that one. That's the real meat in the matter, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
Like, yeah, forgiveness, acceptance. You just touched on a whole another world of conversation. What was the best advice you've ever received?
I mean, I think the best advice I probably got was, the day that I got asked the question, like, hey man, if you treated your business like you treat your wife, how successful would it be? And it was just a question, right? And I think sometimes the best advice is the questions we're asked that are really powerful, that help us, transform our lives. And, that's what I believe. It's not really being told something. It's more being asked something, and you begin to, go deeper in your own thoughts and beliefs. And so that would probably be it for me, for sure.
Love it. And then finally, Bud, do you have a quote, a motto, something that's driving your every kind of thought process right now?
I'll go with chapter 1 of my book, and really what it is like being committed to consistency. And that's really kind of like my first rule, is like the first commitment you need to make is that you'll be consistent at showing up at whatever you say you want to do. And so that's kind of where it always starts with me.
I love it. Can you get the book on Amazon? Where's the book?
Yeah. So my book is on Amazon. Obviously it's called Man in the Mirror. I also have a podcast, Habit-Based Lifestyle. I think we're on episode 514. So yeah, feel free to check it out. It's been going for about 4.5 years. I've taken some breaks from it, but yeah, it's been great, man. So,
awesome. And then URL, some way people can get in touch with you.
Yeah. So you can follow me on, social media, Jesse, Jesse, Ewell on Facebook. You can find me, or on Instagram, Jesse, Jesse.Ewell. If you want to reach out to me, Jesse at Habit-Based Lifestyle. You can reach out to me through email.
Beautiful. All right, buddy. Thank you so much. Time and knowledge. So appreciated that. I know that there's going to be some huge change in the world coming, and I think you're going to be a huge part of it. So much appreciated. My
cool.
friend.
Well, hey, thank you so much, man, for allowing me to be on and just share this time with you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jess.